The objection from achievement runs as follows. Some groups have demonstrably achieved more than others in science, art, and civilization building. Doesn't this differential achievement support the idea of inherent group superiority? This objection conflates the product of circumstance with evidence of inherent worth, a category error of considerable magnitude. Achievement is a function of access to resources, to accumulated knowledge, to political stability, to trade networks, to educational institutions, to freedom from violence and exploitation. These conditions are themselves products of historical processes, including conquest, colonialism, and the theft of labor and resources from precisely the groups that are then presented as underachieving. The most striking civilizational achievements in human history occurred in specific geographic and historical conditions that created compounding advantages across generations. The European scientific revolution and industrial revolution occurred in a context of global colonial extraction that transferred enormous wealth and resources to Europe. The question of what European civilization would have achieved without access to enslaved African labor, extracted American mineral wealth, and colonial food systems is one that supremacist arguments never address, because to address it honestly would dissolve the comparison. Furthermore, the record of achievement by groups under conditions of severe oppression demonstrates conclusively that achievement follows opportunity, not inherent worth. The extraordinary artistic, intellectual, and scientific contributions of Jewish communities in Europe despite centuries of persecution, the cultural production of the African diaspora under and after slavery, the scientific and mathematical achievements of Islamic civilization during the European Dark Ages, all of these show that remove the opportunity and you reduce the achievement. This is a straightforward empirical fact that the achievement objection cannot accommodate. The objection from nature runs. Natural hierarchies exist everywhere in the biological world. Is supremacy not simply an acknowledgement of natural order? This objection commits two distinct errors: the naturalistic fallacy and a mischaracterization of what hierarchy means in biology. The naturalistic fallacy is the inference from X exists in nature to X is good or right. Nature contains predation, disease, starvation, and earthquakes. The existence of these things in nature does not constitute an argument that we should preserve them or organize our societies around them. The entire project of civilization is, in large part, the project of ameliorating natural conditions. To invoke nature as a moral standard is to abandon the project of ethics entirely. The biological claim also misrepresents hierarchy in ecology. Hierarchies of function exist in ecosystems, but these hierarchies describe ecological relationships and energy flows. They do not assign worth. No biological hierarchy assigns permanent, transcontextual superiority to one type of creature. Hierarchy in biology is contextual, relational, and functional, not the kind of absolute assignment of inherent worth that supremacy claims. Furthermore, humans are beings who can reflect on and modify their natural tendencies. The fact that dominance hierarchies appear in primate social groups does not mean that human beings cannot or should not critically examine and constrain those tendencies. Our capacity for ethical reflection is precisely what makes us moral beings rather than mere biological machines. To appeal to nature to escape the demands of ethics is to abandon what makes moral argument possible in the first place. The objection from necessity argues, without hierarchy and the recognition that some people are better suited to lead than others, civilization collapses. Order requires ranking. This objection trades on a crucial ambiguity between functional role differentiation and inherent worth, and uses that ambiguity to smuggle in the conclusion it needs. Every complex society requires coordination, specialization, and structures of authority. Surgeons perform surgery. Administrators administer. Engineers engineer. These are functional differentiations that do not require the belief that surgeons are worth more as human beings than road sweepers. A society can have a judge and a janitor without believing that the judge's life is more valuable or that the janitor's suffering counts for less. The functional hierarchy required by civilization is entirely compatible with, and in democratic theory actually requires, the equal moral standing of all citizens. Democratic societies are empirical proof of this point. The most successful, stable, productive, and innovative societies in human history have been those that rejected supremacy as a political principle and embraced the equal dignity of all citizens as the foundation of political order. Societies organized around racial, ethnic, or caste supremacy have been characterized by violence, instability, economic inefficiency, and stunted human development for all their members, including those at the top of the hierarchy. The plantation economies of the American South, the apartheid economy of South Africa, the caste-stratified economies of South Asia. None of these represent models of human flourishing. The necessity argument is empirically exactly backwards. The objection from cultural preservation argues, groups have a legitimate interest in preserving their identity and way of life. Does preventing this not amount to cultural suppression? This objection conflates cultural preservation with supremacy and then argues from the legitimacy of the former to the permissibility of the latter. But these are entirely different things. Cultural preservation is legitimate. Supremacy, the claim that one culture is inherently superior to others and that the members of other cultures have lesser worth, is not. One can hold the former without the latter. A group can celebrate its traditions, maintain its language, practice its religion, and transmit its cultural heritage to its children without claiming that other groups' traditions, languages, and religions are inferior. The move from "I love and value my culture" to "your culture is inferior and you are worth less" is not entailed by cultural pride. It is an additional, unjustified step. Moreover, cultural identity is dynamic, not static. No culture in human history has survived by remaining unchanged. The cultures that have flourished are those that engaged with, absorbed, and exchanged with other cultures. The attempt to preserve a culture in amber, to prevent all outside influence in the name of purity, is invariably based on a mythologized account of what that culture actually was. The meritocracy objection holds, not all hierarchy is supremacist. Rewarding people on the basis of their individual abilities and efforts is legitimate and produces good outcomes. This objection is largely correct as a principle. Meritocracy, as an ideal, is not supremacy. But it is often used as a defense of existing hierarchies that are produced by structural inequality rather than merit. The argument moves from the legitimacy of merit-based distinction to the conclusion that existing inequalities reflect merit, a move that requires considerably more scrutiny than it typically receives. More fundamentally, even genuine meritocracy does not support supremacy. Meritocracy, properly understood, assigns functional roles and rewards on the basis of relevant demonstrated capacities. It does not and cannot assign inherent worth. A person of extraordinary cognitive ability is not worth more as a human being than a person of modest cognitive ability. They may deserve a different role for specific purposes, but their lives are not more valuable and their suffering does not count for more. Philosopher Michael Sandel's critique of meritocracy demonstrates that even ideal meritocracy carries the risk of becoming a new supremacy, one in which success generates not just reward but contempt for those who did not earn their position. This is the same error as racial supremacy in a different guise, the conflation of functional standing with inherent worth. The appeal to tradition argues, supremacist beliefs have been held across many cultures and throughout most of human history. Does their universality not give them some legitimacy? The appeal to tradition is one of the oldest and least philosophically defensible moves available. The mere fact that a belief has been widely held for a long time provides no evidence of its truth and no argument for its moral legitimacy. Human beings have, across many cultures and centuries, held beliefs about the movement of the sun and the causes of disease that were simply false. They have practiced slavery, child sacrifice, and trial by ordeal, traditions that were culturally widespread and socially sanctioned. None of this makes those practices right. If anything, the history of supremacist belief provides evidence against its legitimacy, not for it, because that history is inseparable from the history of violence, oppression, and degradation that supremacist belief has produced wherever it has been institutionalized. A belief that consistently produces atrocity, when put into practice, is not rendered more legitimate by its persistence. It is rendered more suspect. The trajectory of moral progress, the slow, contested, but ultimately directional expansion of the circle of moral concern, has consistently moved away from supremacy and toward universalism. That movement is itself philosophically instructive. The relativist defense holds, moral judgments are culturally relative. If different cultures have different moral standards, there is no neutral standpoint from which to condemn supremacy. Moral relativism is a philosophically interesting position, but it is self-undermining as a defense of supremacy. If moral claims are merely cultural constructions with no claim to universal validity, then the supremacists claim itself, that their group is inherently superior and deserves to dominate others, is equally a merely cultural construction with no claim to universal validity. Relativism cannot be used to shield supremacy from critique, while also endorsing supremacy's claim to objective truth. The relativist who defends supremacy is applying relativism selectively, as a shield against external criticism and as a sword to impose their own values on others. Moreover, the strongest arguments against supremacy do not rely on culturally specific moral premises, but on logical consistency, empirical evidence, and the inner logic of practical reason itself. The argument that arbitrary selection of criteria is circular is not a culturally specific argument. It is a claim about the structure of valid reasoning that applies in any cultural context. The empirical finding that race has no stable biological referent is not a Western value judgment. It is a finding of natural science. These arguments do not depend on cultural premises that the supremacist can reject as foreign. The softer civilizational defense argues, we need not say that certain people are worth less, only that certain cultures are more advanced, more rational, or more capable of self-governance. This civilizational version of supremacy is in some ways more dangerous than crude racial supremacy because it is more difficult to identify and contest. But it is subject to all the same objections, dressed in more sophisticated language. The claim that certain cultures are more advanced or more rational carries the same arbitrary criterion problem as explicit racial supremacy. Advanced by what measure? Rational by whose standard? These claims invariably turn out, on examination, to mean more like the civilization making the judgment. This is not an objective standard. It is circular self-affirmation with an academic veneer. The history of civilizational supremacy is also a history of strategic blindness. It ignores the achievements of supposedly less advanced civilizations, attributes to civilization what belongs to circumstance, and consistently mistakes unfamiliarity for inferiority. The judgments of civilizational advancement made by colonial powers in the 19th century, which classified African, Asian, and indigenous American societies as primitive and in need of European governance, have been consistently refuted by subsequent historical scholarship, which has revealed these societies to be complex, dynamic, and characterized by sophisticated institutions, knowledge systems, and moral frameworks.